All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this session of Cloud Lunch and Learn. Today, Jackson Feldon is going to get you ready for the SC-900 exam, which is the Microsoft Security Compliance and Identity Fundamentals exam. So I am your host and moderator, Dwayne Netwick, and I will be posting some links in the chat, in the comments as we go along. If you have any questions or anything during the session, you can post a comment on the YouTube live, and we will respond to it. Other than that, Jackson, I'm going to turn it over to you. Have a great session.
Okay, thank you, Dwayne, for the intro. Welcome, everybody. Yeah, I'm Jackson Feldon, one of the team members from the Cloud Lunch and Learn. And then my goal today is hopefully to make your life a little bit easier and give you some important tips and important kind of a key concept when it comes to the SC-900. I've done this exam a while, and I kind of worked hard for the last couple of days to put a summary into this 1 hour presentation. And hopefully you can stay with me now for the next 1 hour to get some good tips in order to help you to pass on the exam. Yeah, just a quick intro about myself. At the moment, I'm working as a senior cloud security consultant, and for the last couple of years, my life has been 100% cloud security. I'm also a MVP security, and then on my day-to-day, I'm kind of posting some videos and doing presentations all the time about security. If you want to follow me, please, you can find me on LinkedIn. My address is in there, and I have a YouTube channel as well. Whatever I'm learning on my day-to-day when implementing some complex projects, I record some videos, and the idea is to kind of save time from you in terms of doing all the research or all the kind of heavy lifting I'm doing for you and recording some step-by-step videos. Anyway, let's go straight into the business. The agenda for the next 1 hour is first, especially if you're new into the Microsoft exams, I have a few slides to show how the kind of the interface looks like, what's kind of sort of questions you will get, and let's take from there. And then the next one is some key security concepts when it comes to zero trust and the security model from Microsoft, and some kind of very likely subjects from the exam. I just want to again give you a key message from some terms you need to remember. And then the biggest part from this presentation is going to do a good review into the security, compliancy, identity, and some Microsoft solutions as well when it comes to Defender for Endpoint, Defender for Cloud, Azure Sentinel, all of these kind of big security products from Microsoft. You need to have a good understanding what they are about when you do the exam. And then at the end, hopefully I don't have too many questions, too many things to cover in this 1 hour. The last one, I want to give you some sample questions I took from Microsoft websites. They are really kind of similar from the real exam. And then after this presentation, you can kind of walk away with a good understanding how what to expect from the questions when you do this exam. Okay, talking specifically about this exam, here is the kind of the story. Let's say the first part, when it comes to some general concept, is it counts from 10 to 15%. And then much bigger when we are talking about Azure, AD or Azure Active Directory, or the new tool now called Microsoft Intra, and then that goes to 25 to 30% of the questions you will get. And then all the security solutions, as quickly I already said, Defender for Cloud App Security, Microsoft Intra, and all of those things, it counts from 25 to 30%. And then finally, the last one in regards to the compliancy, from 25 to 30. If you are wondering how, especially if you are new into the Microsoft business in terms of exams, you will get between 35 to 40 questions, and you need to pass, the pass mark, is 70%. Then if you are good in maths, you can kind of predict how many questions you will get around each of those subjects. And then Dwayne will paste some key links for you to have a look. And then if you want to have a better understanding, about the subjects from this exam with some more details, yeah, here is the link that will be posted on the chat box in a few minutes. Okay, very important here as well. I just want to provide, some good information here. Very important. You don't need to do now. Okay, when you get a link, maybe after the session, please make sure first you log on to learn.microsoft.com. Okay, if you've never been in that website, just make sure you log on with your Microsoft credentials, and then when you are there, paste this link into that window. Okay, this is the easiest way for you to get, let's say, full access in some additional, let's say, into the manual for the SC-900. Okay, I really will do my best. Yes,
Jackson, your
yes,
slides are not moving.
same thing. Oh my goodness.
There we go.
Maybe.
There we
go. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I will keep like that just to play safe. Then that's interesting. Yeah. Can you see my slides now?
I can. Yes.
Yeah. Good. Okay. I will keep like that. Yeah. Then it's not a big deal. Okay, thanks for letting me know. And then, yeah, as I was saying, when you are into the learn.microsoft.com, just paste this link in here for you to go straight into the course material. And then in here, you will have, a couple of modules that will cover everything you need in terms of the SC-900. And then after that, please don't leave this session. For me, it's very important to get, the feedback from this session, and, for Microsoft as well. They are keen to understand, what the students are thinking. And then please, before you switch off, make sure you go to this website here. There is a short, quick class evaluation, and I'm kind of really looking forward to get your feedback. Okay, and then when you finish the class survey, drop us a quick email to cloudlunchandlearn@outlook.com, and then I just need to match for the guys who are filling out the evaluation, and then from tomorrow I can double check and then issue to you a course completion badge, and then you can always add on your LinkedIn, on your other social media, just to show you have finished this course. Okay, please do that for me. Okay, don't walk away without finishing the course evaluation. That's important for me. Anyway, let's keep moving. Lots of things for us to go over today. Okay, if you never done any Microsoft exam before, okay, let me explain 1 minute or 2 minutes how it looks like. Okay, first of all, you will get some multiple choice single answer, okay, where you will have the options in here, and then you need to pick the right answer. Could be A, could be B, could be C, and there is no way for you to select more than one. A bunch of questions, out of those from 35 to 40 questions, a bunch of other questions will be multiple choice, as the name suggests, and then you need to pick, the right, 2 answers, sometimes, is 3 answers, and so on. Not too many, but a couple of questions are in regards to kind of, drag and dropping thing. You will get, for example, on the left-hand side, for example, Microsoft Azure Defender for Endpoint, Office 365, and then here on the other corner, there is a small definition for each of them, and then you need to drag them to the right, to the right place. In the last one, quite a lot. I remember when I did my exam, a while ago, I got quite a lot of these questions in here, where you will see there is a statement about anything I will cover today, and then on that statement you need to kind of pick if the statement is correct, and then you pick yes, or if the statement is wrong, or let's say false, and then you need to pick 2. Okay, these are the sort of questions you will get between those 40, 35 to 40 questions. And as I said a couple of times already, I believe for any Microsoft exam you are doing, the pass mark is always 70%. I've been doing Microsoft exams since, my goodness, 1995, I think. And yeah, the pass mark is always, 75% you need to get. Again, if you've never done any other exam, of course, this is not a real exam, otherwise that would be illegal. But here is the interface. You get the question in here. In this case, it's a single answer you need to pick from here. You can always see how much time you have. Let's say if the total time is 50 minutes, you will see here what's the remaining time for that exam. And here you can move forward, you can move backwards as well. Maybe, I don't know, question 5, you are not too sure. And then when you move to question 6, something triggers in your brain. And, oh yeah, now remember question 6. Yeah, no problem. You can go back and then, change the answer. Another thing you can do as well, if you are not too sure about the answer, my advice would be, let's say, okay, you think letter B is the right one, stick with your guess, select letter B, and then you can come here and mark the question to review. And then, keep moving forward, because you don't want to kind of finish the exam. You don't want to rush, at the end. The good news is when you finish the exam, you will get something like this, where, how many answers you have, how many questions you have answers, how many questions you have, missed, you didn't pick anything. But the good news now is when you click, for example, here, you can basically jump into those questions and then review, change the answer, and so on. I would advise, if you are not sure about some of the answers, pick, whatever is your first guess, and then you can always measure the time. At the end of the exam, you could be, you could have, I don't know, 10 minutes left, or 20 minutes left, and then you can go on your own time after those questions you have marked, and then change the answer, if you think you missed something. Okay, that's, again, especially if you've never done any other exam, this is what I quickly want to cover in regards how the exam looks like. We will provide the link, if you go to aka.ms exam demo, you can just get familiar with the interface. Again, if you've never done. If you have done other exams in the past, don't worry too much, because the interface is going to be the same, only, of course, new questions from the SC-900. Okay, sorry for the high speed, kind of, I have plenty of things to cover today. Now let's go straight into the business and talk about some key elements you need to know for the exam. And please remember, after this presentation, I would advise to go to those, to that book, and then do some additional reading, just to make sure you're not missing anything. Okay, the first kind of, is not a Microsoft specific concept, is a kind of a general one, is the zero trust. And then, likely enough, for you to get some or one or two questions in regards to the zero trust. And what you really need to remember is, or are, the 3 principles. Okay, the zero trust is the idea for, verify explicitly. It means, every time a user is logging in, every time a user is, trying to connect a resource and so on, we should not trust that, user or that situation. And then, using, for example, conditional access, we can double check if you are happy with the user, if you are happy with the condition, the user is not connecting outside of the country, or the user is not connecting from a unknown device, and so on. Again, the zero trust, we should always apply the least privilege. It means if you are not making changes on the system, let's say resetting passwords, changing the configuration, you shouldn't log on with any user that has that permission. You should be using a basic user, and when you need some additional permissions, you can escalate that permissions on the fly. As I will explain in a few minutes, PIM is we can use for that. And the last one is assume breach. Nobody is 100% protected. And then, in terms of that, segmentation, network use devices, and so on, we need to pay attention as well. Okay. Anyway, the short, let's say, key takeaway from here is the zero trust is a methodology. Okay, it's not a tool, it's a methodology. And the key 3 pillars from that are verify explicitly, last privilege access, and assume breach. Okay, please remember that for the exam. Okay, another important kind of concept for the exam is the defense in depth methodology. Okay, years and years and years ago, before cloud, people had the feeling, oh yeah, if I have a good firewall, everything will be behind that firewall, and we should be, I would say, not 100% safe, but safe enough, or very safe. Now things are different. Our data is not only behind a firewall, is not only in the file server into the local network. The data is everywhere, and then this is why the old style doesn't work anymore. And the defense and depth methodology means we need to have numerous layers that will give additional protection. Start with a very basic physical layer, all the key devices, servers, routers, and the key hardware should be locked behind a data center, a safe room. And then we need to implement all the protection around the identity and access, and then set the perimeter. I'm not going to explain in details on all of them. Every time you are seeing these bullet points, okay, please kind of try to save somewhere on your head, because that can be a good question for the exam. For this exam is a kind of just a foundation exam. You don't need to know, you don't need to go very deep into whatever I'm presenting here, but you need to be able to connect all the dots. And then if you get a question in regards what are from the following, what are the three part of the defense and depth methodology, and then you will get, I don't know, maybe 6 answers, and you need to pick the 3 ones from this list in here. Okay, moving forward, the next one is the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. Again, to make your life as easier, I can try to do it. Okay, I kind of underline some key ideas in here. For example, in here, it provides the best practices, documentation, tools, to help anybody. Yeah, the idea is for any company looking to move to the cloud, maybe they are a little bit behind, a little bit lost, how they can move the business into the cloud. And then, yeah, that's the place to go. If you just go to Google or Bing and search for Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, you will get into this place. And then, the clients or yourself can go there and say, oh yeah, let's have a look into the migration. What are the options for me to migrate a SQL Server database, to migrate a bunch of servers and so on? After the migration or with the migration, what are the key things I need to remember, I need to implement in terms of security? All of those documentations are in here. Again, you don't need to be a specialist and go deep in each of them, but you need to understand what is the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework for Azure. The next one is when it comes to the shared responsibility model, very likely for you to get maybe 1 or 2 questions on the exam. It's very easy, to be honest. Okay, have a look in here. This is what you need to understand. If you have your environment all on-prem, okay, let's say I haven't migrated anything to the cloud, all on-prem, and then I don't need to tell you, you are responsible for all the layers. You need to manage the physical data center. You need to manage the physical networking, switches and routers and so on. You need to manage the servers, the host, the operating system, and everything. You need to manage every single bit in order, to keep that up and running. But if we migrate to the cloud, for example, okay, let's migrate our Exchange server into Office 365. Now, Office 365, Exchange Online is an example of SaaS. Okay, here there is a quick explanation, software as a service. The good news is now we pay, of course, that we pay a monthly subscription for Microsoft, but the beauty of that, Microsoft will do all the hard work for us in terms of keeping the servers up and running, doing all the patching on the server, doing the restarts when needed, doing the upgrades and maintaining the network, and so on. Okay, for the exam, yeah, you might get some questions like, oh yeah, what is your responsibility as a client if you are using a SaaS application? Okay, and then it's pretty much nothing, of course, just here, the top layer. On the other hand, if you are using infrastructure as a service, yeah, then there are some responsibilities, in here, some other shared responsibilities, and so on. Okay, please remember this picture, and if you go to the manual I shared with you, you can have a better reading, okay, and a better understanding as well. Okay, the next one is in terms of the Microsoft principles. This is, when it comes to the approach for privacy. Again, make sure you understand these these ones here. I could explain, oh yeah, Microsoft never, and this is, I need to say, Microsoft is very good on that. They never use they never use the client information to do any marketing target campaign or things like that. And Microsoft, everything Microsoft does is fully transparent. They don't try to hide anything in terms of the service they offer when it comes to the cloud system, okay, security and so on. Again, if you want to have to do a kind of deep dive into each of those elements, please go into the book or do some additional research. But if you can remember those 6 principles, okay, that should be enough for the exam. Okay. Anyway, sorry for the high speed. I just wanted to make a bit of room. Probably everything is important, by the way. Everything is important. But if you never done any work on Microsoft security, you never came across before with Defender for Cloud, you never done any work or never done any reading on Azure Sentinel, these are massive piece of products Microsoft has available. And then this is why I want to make a bit of more space for me to explain about them, because they are key concept for that. Anyway, now let's do I wouldn't say a deep dive, but a good dive into the security concepts and the compliance as well. Another thing I need to say for this exam, guys, this exam is not really a technical exam. It's more a, how could I say, it's a kind of pre-sales level. You need to understand what is each tool about, some those key concept, but you don't need to know how to do a full implementation of Defender for Cloud apps. You don't need to kind of do a implementation of Defender for cloud server and so on. But from a pre-sales, you need to understand. Okay, let's go now for some heavier things. First one, and very, very important, okay, if you can remember, the Azure AD and the Microsoft Intra, they represent, between 25 to 30% of the exam. If you never done anything on Azure, I could say is a core element to keep all your infrastructure, all your security and your cloud service running. Okay, that's the place where you go to set up basic things like users and groups and passwords. And then when we are talking about security, is the place where we start setting up the multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication, if it's new for you, is the way to add an additional layer when you are logging into the system. Instead to provide only username and password, now we are looking for an additional info, like could be a code you will get on your mobile, could be maybe you just you need to authorize, just click on approve or something like that. Okay. And by the way, maybe you came across already, if you implement multi-factor authentication, yeah, just with this feature itself, you can remediate kind of 99.9% of the stolen credentials just by implementing multi-factor authentication. Connected to that, we can implement conditional access. Again, there's a big piece of configuration we can do. As the name suggests, conditional access is we set condition to allow the user to log on, or to allow the users to log on and access some of the applications. For example, I'm based here in Dublin, in Ireland. And then a condition my company could set is Jackson only can log on if the request comes from any public IP from Ireland. And end of the story. If Jackson is trying to log on from the UK, from America, from Australia, and so on, thanks to the conditional access, that login will be blocked straight away. Okay, we can set a condition saying, oh yeah, Jackson can log on from Ireland, but can only use iOS device, okay, not Windows, not Android, and so on. Again, I could be talking now for the next 30 minutes about conditional access, but as I said quickly, you set the conditions how the user is able to log on and connect your SaaS applications like SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange Online, and so on. The next one that connects with the authentication is Windows Hello. And then, guys, to make your life easier, every time you see some additional words in here, it's kind of just for you to quickly remind what that is about. Windows Hello for Business is the method companies can use to allow or not users to log on via, instead, username and password, to log on using face recognition, to log on using a PIN, or to log on via fingerprint, and so on. Okay, any question you get on the exam related to Windows Hello, please remember straight away is just the way we can manage the authentication method for users in our organization. Okay, before, when I was talking about quickly about zero trust, as hopefully you can remember, one of the principles is in regards to use the least privilege. It means if today or this morning I'm going only to read emails and do a bit of documentation on my project, why should I be logged on with administrator credentials? The good news is using PIM, okay, the privilege identity management. That's the way companies can implement to say, okay, Jackson can become an administrator or a global administrator, but because time by time I need to do some advanced configuration, but that only works when Jackson makes a request. Somebody needs to approve, and then that request will be available only for 1 hour or 2 hours or so on, just in time, privilege and just in time access. And then for the next 1 hour, I will be able to do all the complex configuration. After 1 hour, I'm, how could I say, reverted back to be a basic user, and then I don't have any admin access anymore. Okay, anything regarding to privilege management, the just-in-time access, yeah, that's the Microsoft feature. Okay, we can use privilege identity management. The next one, part of the configuration is the security default. Again, instead to go there, every single user must have multi-factor authentication enabled. We want the passwords to be complex, and instead to I would say lose time, to spend time setting up 10 security settings, we can go and just turn on, or we can just enable the security default, and that will bring some of the most important, I don't want to call basic, but some of the very important configuration, they will be turned on automatically for everybody. Okay, this is what you need to remember when it comes to the security default. The next one is the Azure AD password protection. As the name suggests, and probably you have a guess already, this is the idea to avoid users to use those silly passwords. Let's say password or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or if my company name is Contoso, I don't want my users to use Contoso as password. And then using the Azure AD password protection, the security team, the cyber security can go there and set some security levels when it comes to password, specify words and numbers, and we users should not be able to use when setting up passwords. Okay, the next one is you might come across in regards hybrid identity. Okay, the idea is, if you're familiar, if you're not talking about cloud, we are talking only about on-prem. We are talking about Azure, no, sorry, not Azure, sorry. We are talking about Active Directory, okay, running on domains on Server 2012, Server 2008, and so on, only in the cloud. Only on-prem. Oh my goodness, think I need a coffee. If I'm talking about cloud, I'm talking about Azure AD. Okay, and then initially they are disconnected. In order for me to make a user or a credential hybrid, what we can use is Azure AD Connect. Again, if I can explain in 1 minute, a long story, but if I can explain in 1 minute, Azure Connect, as the kind of the name suggests, is the connection between a local on-prem domain in the Azure AD. From there, we can set some configuration to basically replicate every single user on-prem into the cloud, to decide to replicate the passwords as well, to replicate the users, and so on. And then it means by the time we create a user on-prem, thanks to the Azure AD Connect, that user will be replicated to Azure AD, and that user becomes a hybrid. The user now can use with the same username, with the same password. That user can access internal on-prem resources and can access cloud resources as well on Azure, on SharePoint, OneDrive, and so on. Okay, that's the idea behind hybrid identity in Azure AD Connect. The next level is, let's say my company Contoso is buying or became partner of another company called Fabricam. I'm just using the Microsoft names. Contoso and Fabricam, they became partners. And they want to allow users from Contoso to access resources from Fabricam, a database, a file server, and so on, and vice versa as well. Instead to replicate names or maybe duplicate names, we can enable the Azure AD B2B, or B2B stands for business to business, and then people from Fabricam, they can start giving permissions for users created on Contoso. And when these two organizations are booking meetings, they can check the calendar availability from people from different organizations. Okay, anything in regards to connecting the identity system between two organizations, the component we use for that is Azure AD B2B. Okay. Anyway, because the identity is such important thing, because don't need to tell you, if a hacker managed to get into a username and password, and multi-factor authentication is not enabled, and conditional access is not enabled, or enabled but not in a good security level, disaster. The good news is, using the Azure AD identity protection, okay, this is a feature that can detect if things are not really looking good. For example, eventually there is a user who connected from Dublin 9 a.m., and then 30 minutes later, there is an authentication coming from that same user, but coming from Australia. Oops, that kind of looks like an impossible travel activity, because it's not possible to in half an hour to be in Australia. Of course, we could use VPN and so on, but normal is not possible. And then the Azure AD identity protection is able to to catch those users. Some other things as well. Microsoft keeps scanning the dark web, and then every time Microsoft finds Office 365, or let me explain the right way. Every time Microsoft finds an Azure AD identity, username and password for sale into the dark web, that user will be flagged straight away if the company is using Azure AD identity protection. And then the people from the SOC team, people looking after the security, can straight away, or should straight away, disable that user until the password is enabled. Okay, please remember, Azure AD identity protection, as the name suggests, is the right feature to protect the identities on Azure AD. And then before we move on, it's kind of simple, but you need to understand the difference between authentication and authorization. As the definition, shows in here, authentication is a kind of logon process. The user needs to specify username, password, or via Windows Hello, could be the PIN, could be face recognition, fingerprint, and so on. This is step number one for the user to kind of get into and be able to log on. The second step is to do the authorization. When that user try to access a SharePoint page or try to access a file into OneDrive, and then of course that user must have permissions in order to reach the SharePoint page, in order to open a file from the OneDrive. Okay, that's the little connection between authentication and authorization. You might get a question on the exam in regards to that. Okay, and then after so much things, when I was explaining about Azure AD, a while ago, is still new enough by the time I'm running this presentation, is the Microsoft Entra. in order for organizations, in the past, organizations, they had to buy different products, Azure AD P1, Azure AD P2, and then identity protection, another, PIM to do the the permission management, and all of those things. What Microsoft did, they packed all the relevant tool when it comes to the identity management into a new product called Microsoft Entra. And then now it's much easier for the organizations to manage the Azure AD permission management and verify identity. Instead to set up different things, they can do that from a single place or from a single product called Microsoft Entra. Okay, if you get any question in regards to Microsoft Entra, please remember, Microsoft Entra is not a new name for Azure AD. Okay, it's not a kind of the new name or something that in the future Azure AD will die. No, Microsoft Entra is something on the top, and Azure AD is one of the key pillars from Microsoft Entra. Okay, hopefully you guys are still with a good level of energy to follow my thoughts. I just want to make sure I can finish all the key useful concept for this exam, okay, in 1 hour. The next one, very important, is the Microsoft Defender family. Probably, if you are following the Microsoft security, let's say, evolution, you came across so many different names: Defender for Cloud, Defender for Cloud Apps, Defender for Office 365, and so on. As I told you before, for this exam, you don't need to be an architect and be able to implement all of those solutions, but you need to have a good understanding and a clear understanding what each of those components is about. Okay, starting with the first one, if you see the Defender for Identity, usually the connection you need to make, especially for the exam, is the following. Is a brilliant piece of software, by the way, where we can install on the on-prem servers, on the domain controllers, and then after installing an agent on every single domain controller, we can have a much better visibility, because that agent will collect signals happening on on-prem domain controllers from authentication and whatever the users are doing on the local domain controller. We can get those signals into the cloud and then analyze whatever is happening. Okay, usually the key message here is Defender for Identity is a client, is an agent we install on the local domain controllers to have a better visibility throughout signals coming to that server. The next one, the Defender for Cloud App. Okay, that's a very important one. The connection is regarding Shadow IT. By the way, if you're not too familiar with Shadow IT means applications your end users could be running on the organization, and those applications, they are not, how could I say, authorized by the IT system. Maybe the users are saving files on Google, on the Gmail, on Google Drive, if I have good memory. Maybe people are using Dropbox. Maybe people are using some other apps they shouldn't be using. Thanks to the Defender for Cloud app, we can have full visibility of each user, from where that user connects, the cloud apps, and what sort of software that user is using. On that as well, we can do session control. If I want to avoid users, for example, to copy sensitive information from company managed app like Word, Excel, Outlook, and try to paste into other apps. I don't know, could be Gmail, or if I'm using my mobile, I could try to get a company email content and paste into my Gmail, or try to paste into my notes on my mobile. That's not possible, because from the control, session control, we can avoid and have a better control regarding copy and paste between applications. The next one, if you come across any question in regards to Defender for Office 365, straight away you need to remember a couple of things. First, this is the email protection. Okay, every time there is an email coming into your tenant, into your Exchange Online, this is the first layer of protection, where the system will get that email, check if it's a spam, check if it's there is a virus, or so on. Part of the solution as well is the safe links. Every time a user clicks in a link, first Microsoft verifies the destination to see if that is a kind of good website. If it's fine, the user eventually is connected to that destination. If it's a bad site, the user is blocked. In the same story as well, every time a user opens up a file with a safe attachment, Microsoft does, of course, a good verification to make sure that file, doesn't compromise anything in regards to that workstation. Okay, these are the key 3 things you need to remember around the Defender for Office 365. If we are talking about, or if you get any question about Defender for Endpoint, straight away, what you need to remember is antivirus. Okay, there are plenty of competitors out there, but the Defender for Endpoint is not only AV. AV is one of the pillars, but is an antivirus. Is the ADR solution as well, extended detection and response. And here we can see all the information about the device score, how bad or good in terms of protection that device is. And we can have a full visibility as well of the exposure score. If the company is not doing a great job when it comes to have all the apps fully updated, to have all the operating system fully updated, fully patched, and so on, that is measured on every single device, and then there is a combined score that will tell from 0 to 100 how good or bad the exposure score is. Okay, to keep the story short, as the name suggests, Defender for Endpoint is all about device protection, okay, antivirus, EDR, exposure, and so on. Okay, the next level is the Microsoft Defender for Cloud. That can be a little bit tricky. Microsoft Defender for Cloud has numerous components, as you can see in here. Defender for servers, Microsoft Defender for servers, Microsoft Defender for storage, for Key Vault, for app security, and so many. Okay, I'm not going to read everything. For the exam, it's very important for you to understand anything regarding the kind of security posture in general is done or is measured by Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Okay, you might come across this term, Cloud Security Posture Management, or CSPM. Okay, and then again, you need to understand the question, but most likely part of the answer, or the answer actually, is going to be Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Okay, you can buy, the exam doesn't go on terms of cost. As far as I can remember, it's not a big deal on cost, but real life, you don't need to buy all of these components here, together. You can pay maybe for now only for Defender for servers. And then at some stage, you might enable Defender for storage. And then at some stage, you enable Defender for DNS. And this is the beauty of the cloud. You pay as you go. Okay, that's the heavy slide when it comes to the Microsoft Defender family. Now the next one is, portals. That's interesting. If you have been working with the Microsoft security, and then maybe there is nothing new here for you. If you are new into this exam, and if you are new into the, the whole Microsoft security, Microsoft is working hard and doing a good job to kind of has less portal, to have more information, a combined information in portals, but we still have a variation. Probably the most important for the exam, anyway, everything is important for the exam. But let's say the first one is very important. The Microsoft 365 Defender, this is one of the most important. Before, Microsoft had a different portal, a portal for Defender for Cloud, a portal for Defender for Endpoint, another portal for cloud apps, another one, and so on. Eventually, for the last couple of years, they have been migrating those portals into a single place. And this place actually is Defender for Cloud. I will come back to this slide just a second. I have a screenshot in here just to give a better understanding. And in here, as you can see, if I go into the Microsoft 365 Defender, the beauty of that is here is the place where I can see all the incidents and the alerts from different tools. Okay, incidents and alerts from Defender for Cloud, Defender for Office 365, Defender for Endpoint, and so on. Okay, when I go here, I can see. Interesting enough, it's kind of, for you need to understand what's the difference between an alert and incident. Basically, alert is something that happens once. Okay, oh yeah, there was a ransomware attack in one device that will trigger one alert. Okay, oh yeah, a user X got a bad email that triggered, another alert. But eventually, in case of ransomware, eventually that activity that started in a single device now is spreading, and similar activity now has happened in multiple devices. Yeah, and then what Microsoft does, a really good idea, they get all of those, how could I say, individual alerts, and they combine into a single incident. And this is absolutely brilliant, because for the guys, the analysts or the SOC team doing the investigation, now they can go to a single incident and see 10 alerts in the same place, instead to try to understand each individual alert. This is the beauty of, have all of those tools working together. And then here as well, we have some other, other things. The under the asset, I can have a look into my device and identity and find out, what are the compromised identity or the risky identity, the risky devices, the medium risk identity, the medium risk devices, and so on. And then a whole bunch of information for endpoints that comes from Defender for Endpoint, and then another section here under the email and collaboration that comes from Defender for Office 365, and then another section in here from Cloud Apps that comes from Defender for Cloud Apps. And the beauty is, in the past, I had to go to 3 different portals. Now I can come to a single portal called Microsoft Defender Portal. Okay. And then on top of that as well, we have another one that's very important, the Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Usually, for the exam, anything regarding to endpoint configuration, like, oh, I need to push an application, I want to push a patch, I want to change a registry key, I want to change a configuration. All the Intune, okay, all the Intune configuration is done via Microsoft Endpoint Manager. And then we have 2 different portals or 2 places talking about compliance. Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, okay, single place where you go there to have a look into all the compliance status. And we have the Compliance Manager. For example, if you are looking to implement, encryption into the sensitive data, sensitive files, sensitive emails, that's a place where you can go to set up all the configuration to auto-detect sensitive information like credit card, and then eventually encrypt that information or that file straight away. And then the last one is the Microsoft Security Trust Portal. Eventually, if you need to check all the Microsoft compliance certification, there are so many international and local certification. If you want to check if Microsoft, complies with an international standard, that's a place to go, where Microsoft presents all the certification for the data centers, for compliance from different vendors or from different organizations. Okay, that's the place you can go. Feel free later on, this recording will be available on YouTube. Feel free later on to kind of stop the video, do a better reading. Here is a small summary regarding the portal. And if you are wondering, how you can get into those portal, for the exam, it would be nice for you to know. Here are all the URLs as well. Okay. The next one is scores. Microsoft is doing a great job in terms of providing information regarding the security posture for different elements. As you can see in here, I could be talking about, okay, what is the overall security score on my organization? Is 50 or is 90 or is 60? And the security posture is a combination about everything: apps, endpoint, identity, absolutely everything. If we are talking about the compliancy, in terms of the compliancy, if you are, for example, encrypting data, if you are encrypting sensitive information like credit cards, if you have implemented data loss prevention that avoids the end users of sharing sensitive information to anybody outside. Yeah, if you want to see how good or bad your organization is on that subject, yeah, you can go over the compliance score. Same story about, quickly, I told you before, the exposure score, to know how good the work has been now in terms of making sure all the operating systems are running with the latest version, with the latest patch, all the apps are fully updated. If there are some apps with bugs, with, let's say, security breaches and so on, we should uninstall those apps. And to see where the company is, security, the exposure score is the place to go. This one here is the device score. Okay, now I don't want to talk about identity, I don't want to talk about compliancy, I want to see about device. If the devices, they have antivirus, if the antivirus is enabled, if key configuration like the ASR have been implemented, and so on, here's the place for us to check. And then from the application point of view, OS, networking, security controls, again, we can see how good or bad this organization is. These terms here is around 58%. Okay, yeah, this is the overall security score. And talking about Azure, that's the place to go when we are talking about the Azure security score. Okay, in general, for all my Azure workloads, virtual machines, if the virtual machines are running behind a firewall, if I don't have firewall, if I'm using at least the security groups to protect those VMs, and the overall security posture for my workloads on Azure. Okay, I know it's quite a lot for you to remember, for the exam, but anyway, I'm doing my best to share some key elements in here from Azure. And then I have we are getting there. 2 more slides, and then I have a couple of sample questions, and then we are done. We are done for now. I don't need to tell you, Azure is a beast. There are hundreds, thousands of elements we can work on Azure, but I did my best here to provide some key elements for the exam. The first one is the Azure Firewall versus Network Security Group. Okay, let me start with the first one. The network security group is not a firewall, but is a good start, is a filtering system. Okay, when I'm deploying Azure virtual machines, I can, using network security groups, to set rules to allow that machine to reach certain destination and to allow other resources to reach my virtual machine. Very simple, okay? It's not a firewall layer 7, it's a filtering system where I can allow or deny traffic going out from that virtual machine or coming in to that virtual machine. This is kind of, basic and cheap. If I'm looking for a full security protection when it comes to manage the packets coming in, going out, and then we should implement Azure Firewall, where we have, much more controls, is much more intelligent in terms of allow packets coming in, coming out. But then you need to pay. Okay, that's not for free. Another important element we could enable is the Azure Bastion. Every time I need to connect from, let's say, my device here, I need to open a connection, a RDP connection to my server. Instead to go via RDP, and then my security group and firewall need to allow that, and can be a bit dangerous as well, we can implement Bastion host, where I don't need to use RDP client anymore. I can connect via web page, and then from HTTP, from a web page, I can basically establish a connection into my device on Azure and start working from that. Azure Blueprint, that's a very important one. Okay, when I'm deploying some workloads on Azure, I want to make sure I'm not missing any key configuration that is part of the deployment I'm doing. A couple of virtual machines, maybe a storage, a SQL server, and so on. And then I can kind of pack those things into Azure Blueprint. And by the time I push the button to install the workloads I'm looking for, all the elements I have pre-configured will be deployed, and I'm sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, that's the idea behind the Azure Blueprint. The security baseline for Azure, as the kind of the name suggests, what you need to remember when working with Azure, and especially for the exam, is all the recommendations in terms of the cloud solution. When again you are implementing your security, implementing your workloads, if the configuration doesn't look too good in terms of security, you can go over the security baseline to measure where your configuration is against the baseline from Microsoft. If it's like that, there are work to be done in order to bring to a kind of comfortable security level. In the Azure DDoS, or distributed denying of service, is a service we need to pay. There is a basic server, but you can pay for the premium server, basically to protect your workloads on Azure against a possible attack coming from somewhere, a DDoS attack. Okay, the last one before we explore a couple of questions is the Azure Sentinel. Okay, Azure Sentinel is a top-class Microsoft software or solution. What you need to remember, very important, three things. Okay, first one, the Azure is the Microsoft solution for security, information, and event management. It means all of my security products, firewall, proxy, it doesn't need to be Microsoft, proxy, firewall, Defender for Cloud, Defender for Identity, all of those elements, we can set up them to send the alerts and to send all the relevant information for one place. This place is Microsoft Sentinel. And then the good thing is, from the security monitoring point of view, the users, the analysts, they go to a single place, and from there they have a bird view what's happening with all the security elements in the organization. The second level is the security orchestration, automation, and response. It means, if there are too many alerts coming from the same device, that device must be compromised. And what we can do is set up Sentinel to act over that and to shut down the server, could be, or to isolate that device from the network to avoid that possible virus or ransomware to spread from the organization. The way, a key concept for the exam, guys, the way for us to connect all the elements to Sentinel is done via something called connector. Okay, basically, there is a connector to connect your firewall. There is a connector to connect your proxy system. There is a place where you connect the Azure AD, a place where you connect the Defender for Cloud and so on into Sentinel. Okay, these are the one-page summary about Azure Sentinel. Okay. Anyway, that's pretty much the heavy theory I wanted to share. Now, let me just provide a few examples in terms of what sort of questions you can get on the exam. If you're a bit tired and about to walk away from the presentation, please make sure you fill out that quick evaluation for me. For me, it's very important, for Microsoft as well, to get your feedback. Because I can't present in full screen, anyway, let me provide the answer here straight away. Let me show 3 or 4 answers, and then on the link Dwayne already shared with you, you can go over those questions just to practice a bit. Let me provide 2 examples, and then we can move on, okay? Anyway, the story here, you should know that. The Zero Trust model operates on a principle of trust no one, verify everything. You need to implement Zero Trust model in your organization. Which 2 options are guiding principles from the Zero Trust model? Okay, and then hopefully you can remember from my previous slide is what I'm talking about, A and B. Okay, verify explicitly and assume breach. Yeah, the other bits are kind of part of the security, but not really related to Defender for Endpoint. zero trust. Let me just, let me get another one here. How many authentication factors must be presented by a user after you enable multi-factor authentication in Azure Active Directory or Azure AD? And then in this case, is 2. In addition for username and password, or in addition to the password, the user needs to present the something else that could be a kind of, approve authentication here, or an additional code, and so on. Anyway, that's pretty much what I wanted to share. Just before I go, guys, on my YouTube channel, last year at some stage, I recorded a video, a 1-hour video for the MS-900. Module 4 on that exam is all about security. And then in that, I go over some heavy theory in terms of security, device encryption, and so many multi-factor authentication, so on. And before you get ready for this exam, or sorry, when you are prepping for this exam, if you have time, have a look on that video to see in action how multi-factor authentication, document encryption, email encryption, privacy, work on that. Please have a look. And that's pretty much from me. Okay, before we go again, make sure you, as prep for the exam, go over to that review the manual, and then have a good read on all the content, just to make sure you are not missing anything. And then from now, when you're about to disconnect, I would appreciate your 2-minute input on my presentation. And then after that, please drop us an email just to make sure you fill out the evaluation. And then from tomorrow, I can double check the evaluation, and then I will send to you the kind of course completion badge. You can kind of do a bit of you can post on your LinkedIn. Okay, that's pretty much it. I'm not sure, Dwayne, if there is any question. Maybe I know it was a heavy presentation, but I want to make sure to provide as maximum information I could.
And there have been there's been a couple questions, so nothing major. It was more at the beginning when talking about some of the structure and some of the questions clarified, but other than that, no. I have posted multiple times the evaluation link as well as the email link to make sure that everybody gets the survey done. And once the survey done, they can get the complete course complete. So that should be all in the chat for everybody to grab and to copy. So Jack,
that's great.
And everybody was attending.
Okay, yeah, the line is
since there are no more questions,
okay.
Yeah, sorry, my internet really bad. So,
no, that's fine. But I think I managed to understand. Yeah. Okay, everybody, thanks very much for spending the last hour with us, and for the guys watching the recording later on. Thanks very much. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Thanks, Dwayne, for the moderation.